what I will be talking about, I just want you to remember 4 things: the people, the resource, the technology, and the government. The critical thing is that the people are all seated here. That is you. The resource is the renewable resources. Then the technology. There are so many technologies out there, but there is what we call appropriate technology. Then we have the government. There are all types of governments. But when you talk about government, it is also people. When we talk about the resource, it is only people who can appreciate the resource. When we talk about technology, the technology is developed by the people, and it is only the people who can determine whether the technology is appropriate. And also the government, it is the people who can make the people in the government support the particular renewable resource development. I'll be giving you some form of introduction. My presentation is going to be jumbled up. When I was only 2 hours, I say, let me just throw in everything. And it's up to you to look for those 4 in my presentation. The order, I don't even remember myself, the order in which I did it, because I know it is there. So you look for the people, the resource, technology, and the government, because that is what is going to be critical in ensuring that development of our renewable energy sources take place. And it is in the same order. The people are the most important. The government is the least important, because the government, when you look at the president of our country, he's a mirror image of the people in that country. So it is the people who determine the government. I'll be talking about geothermal resources and development in Kenya. I'll not go. There are so many things one can talk about. One can look at the whole energy situation in the country. I'm not going to go into that because I might take 4 hours. Then I'll talk about the mandate of the Geothermal Development Company that I work for. Then I'll look at the situation in terms of geothermal. Then I'll look at what I call the enablers, which is very important. When we come to the enablers, we go back again to the people, the technology, and the government. Then I'll look at the current development status in the country since we started following that development model. And then I'll also look at the direct use of geothermal resources. Now, geo, they say, is heat, the earth, and the thermal is the heat from the center of the earth. Now, in the African region, we have geothermal all the way from Yemen. Then we have Egypt, Ethiopia, and then we have Kenya is around there. And then it goes all the way down to Mozambique. Currently, the potential is about 15,000 megawatts. That is in the Rift region. And then it's about 10,000 megawatts in Kenya. These numbers are conservative because apart from Kenya and Ethiopia, there is not much that has been done in terms of determining the potential. The current plans is to install about 10,000 megawatts in the next 10 years, and about 5,000 megawatts of this will be from Kenya. Now, in Kenya alone, we have a number of fields which is around the rift system that have been mapped and the estimates made. Now, we are privileged that we have different grades of resources, and for a geothermal system to occur, you must have the source of heat, and then you must have water. Now, there is a play between the heat flux, or the input of heat, and the amount of water, and you need to strike a certain balance. If the heat is too much, then you will have a dry, completely dry system, which is not sustainable. If it is low, then you will have a wet system, which is also not sustainable. Now, I want to maybe just say this so that we remember going forward. Geothermal is not renewable. It is only renewable as to the technology you are going to employ to harness it. So technology is not like solar, which is always there. You can also mess up with a geothermal system, but I won't go into that. And we can see that in Kenya we have hot springs. This means that there is more water than the energy, the heat flux. Then this is getting better, where we have now the steaming grounds. It is still steam. Then you get fumaroles here. This is very good. There's a higher enthalpy in that. Then there is also the hot ground. Then we get sulfur. Once we get to that stage, it means the heat flux is so strong, the water input is very weak. So in Kenya, we have systems all the way from here to there, so that here you'll just be getting something close to hot air. Luckily, we have technology for taking care of all these type of systems. The model for geothermal in the Rift setup is that you have the hot body, which is a source of heat. Then you have what we call the reservoir. The water comes in, it is heated from here. Then it is trapped within this volcanic mountain. So you drill a well, and the well is drilled into this reservoir. Then you extract the fluids. When you extract the fluids, in terms of steam, you take it through a power plant where you have a condensing unit. You have the turbines. Then you have a condenser behind the turbine. This increases the efficiency of the turbine. But then now, by creating a vacuum, then you condense the steam into water, and the water is injected back into the ground. And that means the system is renewable as long as you are going to inject the water back into the ground. Now, in Kenya, for example, we have the Olkaria power plant generating one plant, 105 megawatts. There is a total of 200 megawatts. But we know that it is abundant, it is Kenyan, it is green, it is least cost currently. The tariffs, that is the levelized tariff, is from about 9 US cents to 12 US cents. And thermal, we are doing from 16 to 23 US cents. Availability for the current plants has been about 95%. It has not been affected by adverse weather. And we have found it's very good for planning because it is predictable, and the technology has been successfully applied in Kenya. Although with a writer, the technology that is being applied now is not as efficient as the coming technology. The life cycle emission, this is from the World Bank. We can see very clear there's coal, there is natural gas, we have nuclear, and then we have hydro. That is an area that Africa is focusing on. There is also biomass. We are focusing on wind. We are focusing on solar, and we are focusing on geothermal. Today, we are talking about geothermal. Now, there was a deliberate decision by the government to go green. The plan is to have at least 90% of our power production being green. Now, this was not arrived at by the government alone. And that's why it's important for the people who are here that the people who understand renewable sat together and I decided that we have to convince our governments to support renewables. And what we did, we had to bring in somebody to assist us, and this we did in Kenya. That we requested the United Nations Geothermal Training Program under the Global Environmental Facility of UNEP to organize for a workshop for decision makers, which was held in Kenya in 2004. Now, you realize that when you call for some of these workshops, some governments will send accountants to attend the workshop. So we had to decide ourselves as to who are the people to be invited. So what we did, we invited, not ourselves, but we asked the UN and the UNEP to invite the decision makers, that is the permanent secretaries from the ministries that are involved in energy development in the country and in natural resources. Then they were taken through a workshop, and they were made to understand the importance of renewables. And what we did was the technical people organized presentations from the country. Then we had also technical presentations from outside. So going forward, from that point, after that meeting, then again, the GF invited the ministers to attend the final closing session and then to make them do a declaration that they were going to go for renewable sources of energy. And you know the ministers are very good at just signing without reading. But the point is that for the decision makers, it is very important to convince them. But the people who understand the importance of the renewables are the ones who are going to come up with these plans. And in that declaration, it was recognized. And this is now in writing signed by the ministers. And therefore, it ended up in the cabinet that geothermal will play a leading role to transform the country into a green economy. That the geothermal projects at Olkaria, which was going on, can be replicated in other potential areas in the country, and that geothermal development stands to benefit from blending of concessional, climate finance, and the private sector investments. That for you to move forward, you have to mix all these different terms of financing. Then that geothermal will help achieve a transformative impact when properly used for power generation and a direct use. For politicians who will make the final decision, this word transformative impact on the people, on the economy is very important. So that as you try to sell a certain technology, the renewables, you must very strongly bring out the transformative impact on the local community, as opposed to talking about industries, manufacturing, and things like this. This sells more. We found that it sells more than industrialization because the politicians normally represent the people, and they are the ones who ended up giving us support. Then that the high upfront investment costs associated with the high geothermal development source risk will hinder fast development of this energy. What that meant was that the government must address the high upfront investment cost. Now, looking at the risk profile, which was also presented to the ministerial team, was that there was lack of risk insurance for the private sector to invest in geothermal in Kenya. And the there was lack of laws and regulations governing geothermal resources. There were laws on energy, but there were no laws on geothermal. And in Kenya, for you to do geothermal is a mineral. So you had to get a license for mining. Geothermal is water. You have to get a license for water abstraction. Geothermal is energy. You had to get a license for energy. And at times, the licensing requirement was at conflict with each other. So there was no specific Geothermal Act that was aligned and in harmony with these other acts. So you'll find that that was a major challenge, the issue of specific laws and the regulations that are purely focused on renewables is important. But you'll find that the laws for geothermal cannot be exactly the same as for wind or for solar. They have to be resource specific. Then there was the issue of equipment and resources for applied research. If you want to develop a certain industry, then you must have resources and to do research and development. Then the biggest problem, and this is what must be addressed, low awareness and the limited information about geothermal energy or about renewables, about biomass, about solar, about wind, and even the estimated resource potential, and if the technologies for harnessing it are available or not. So this was a challenge that needed to be addressed. Then in the final one, which was very important, that there was need to form a Geothermal Development Company. And this was to be a special purpose vehicle to develop strategies, because the politicians have to be assisted to develop the strategies. But these strategies can only be developed by experts who understand the resource. So through this special purpose vehicle, or a Geothermal Development Company, a group of people who have knowledge on geothermal will come together and develop the strategies on how to establish the geothermal potential of the country, identify targets, and define clear implementation and investment plans for accelerated development. And that is how a special purpose company, the Geothermal Development Company, came into being in Kenya with this mandate. Now, when the government formed the Geothermal Development Company, these were the mandate that came out, and the mandate was a product of the meetings that were there. There were 5 areas. One was upfront risk and a cost. So one of the mandates was to see how the upfront risks can be removed and reduce the cost, that is the tariffs, because the tariffs are a product of the investment cost. And the most critical thing is to help the government to think. And I think that's why most of us are here. We are just learning how to think. Imagine you spend all the time just learning how to think. But it's very important that there has to be a group of people doing the thinking and develop strategies. Then, to look at development of infrastructure, surface external drilling, in order to make sure that when the investors come on board, everything is in place. Then to promote direct uses of geothermal for the industrial process, heat, floriculture, that is in the flowers, and then aquaculture and others. Then under capacity development, it was realized that for you to develop an industry in a country, you must have a core team of a level of expertise to form a base for the start of that industry. And this was in order to also manage the public resources and also to support a dynamic industry. The other issue that the government wanted the company to do was that to support it in fund mobilization by doing technical input, coming up with policies which are handed over to the government for the government to implement, and strategies and also regulations. What this means is that for you to do this, you need people. You need engineers, you need lawyers, you need project managers with transactional advisory capabilities, and you need straight project management people. Then to develop projects to bankable stage, to feasibility stage, because an investor is not going to come on board, it's unlikely to come on board unless a project has been developed to a bankable stage. That means a feasibility study has been done, and it shows that the project is viable. And this is, as a minimum, what the government wanted to achieve, that all the projects before an investor comes should have been developed to that stage. The other thing was the issue of engaging investors. And then by carrying out assessment of the investor's appetite. Geothermal is a resource whose technology in terms of exploration as a fuel is the same as oil. But you find that the oil industry has got richer players than in the geothermal industry. Now, if you are looking for investors in geothermal, traditionally you will go to US, you will go to Italy, you will go to Iceland, you will go to New Zealand, Philippines, or Indonesia. But you will find that if you are looking for investors in oil, they are all over. So the issue was that what makes investors interested in oil and not interested in geothermal? And if you want to accelerate the process of development of this resource, you are not going only to go to the traditional investors. You are going to go to investors. So that was one of the mandate of GDC was to look at that. Then the next thing is a power plant was to support the private sector entry and ensure that when an investor is coming from outside, GDC handles all the land issues. And one of the problems we are having in the projects is the issues of wayleave and the community issues to be handled by a local entity. Then all the licensing for the investor is also to be handled by a local entity. But evaluate and recommend technologies to the investors. Because it was very important that many investors, they come in, they're interested in power generation, but they don't want to do direct use. And our aim is that the geothermal resource should be used in a holistic way, whereby you want to generate power, but you also want to do direct use. So the technology that is going to be applied in power generation must lend itself to added direct utilization. Then to facilitate 5,000 megawatts by the year 2030, which is actually in the Vision 2030 of the Kenya government. Now, what GDC did was to look at what experience has been there since 1955, when the first well was drilled in Olkaria. The first power plant of 45 megawatts took 30 years from 1955 to 1985. So we went back to the archives and looked at what happened between that time, why it did long, so that we identify the main cause of the delay. The next power plant was by Kenyan. The first one, 17 years. The other one took 23 years. Then this one also by another local entity is going to be commissioned after 15 years. This one was 45 megawatts, 105 megawatts, 280 megawatts. Then it will carry 3, 11 years. Now, when we went through the earlier development, there are certain issues that we saw. What was the cost, for example, drilling? Why was there high upfront cost? We realized there was an emphasis on the economies of scale as opposed to incremental growth. And that is the problem with the economists. You know, they don't realize that the ants are more efficient than the elephant. And that is why I remember when I went to college, we had mainframe computers that will occupy the whole of this building. And they were less than 2 GB. Then later we had the desktop computers that were smaller. We have had the laptops. Now we are having our mobile phones, which are more powerful than even the mainframe computers. So we need not to think traditionally, because believing that large is better. Now, the development concept in Kenya was that we go for large power plants. And that meant that you must drill and win all the steam before you do the plant, and that takes a lot of time. As an example, we are now developing 280 megawatts at Olkaria. And as of now, we have spent $300 million US on the drilling alone, and the plant will come online, is going to come online. But by the time it comes online this year, it will have taken 15 years. So when you look at the project cost, that you already spent $300 million and you are going to take 15 years for you to recoup your money. So the question is this the emphasis of the economies of scale right with regard to geothermal? Then the other thing, in the geothermal industry, if you are going for a plant of more than 60 megawatts, there are only 3 companies that make those size of turbines. They are Mitsubishi, Toshiba, and Fuji. And when you do a tender, they will all submit the bids for expression of interest, and only one company will make the final bid. So the economy of scale does not make sense. There must be competition. And for you to allow competition, you must go at sizing that makes more bidders come on board. So when you are looking at turbines, we have also to look at the industry and look at the players and ask ourselves, is there going to be a competition? Once we design a project in a certain way, we might find out that that project has been designed for a particular manufacturer, and that kills competition. And it makes other investors think that Kenya is a Mitsubishi zone. And that is what it is at the moment. The other challenge that we realized was that the projects went out without the total required funding not having been committed, or without a proper plan on how we are going to be able to fund for all this, for that development. For example, the 105 megawatts, after the wells were drilled, it took 10 years before the power plant was constructed. So you had more than 100 megawatts sitting there without a power plant. And that means that there was money there in the ground. And you'll find that translates into the project cost. It also translates into the high tariffs. We also realize that investors are not interested in upfront drilling because of the risk factors. Now, the power plant, the funding mechanisms also required long negotiations because you want to go for cheap funding, but you don't consider the fact that the time itself will even if you can get cheap funding that comes late, that funding is not cheap because of the cost of money. Then in this one, I will not talk about it because I don't have the jurisdiction, but the politics was not good. So also the politics affects your development of any resource. There is another important thing. There has to be a policy on risk mitigation or guarantee. And then there should be no other option. The risk must be mitigated against. There's no investor who is going to come in if there are no risk mitigation measures. And this must be clearly defined in the government policy so that any investor, before he comes to the country, he can read the policy and see that all the loose ends have been taken care of. Then undiversified funding options. Many countries, we are going to the DFIs, and we don't look beyond the DFIs. Then there was no direct use of power because the project design and the technology employed cannot allow for direct use. That means at the time of the project inception, once as part of the feasibility study, direct use has to be incorporated in it so that it is given consideration, and that will inform the whole technology that you are going to use. Then one of the other things is location of geothermal resources in chembacks. Some of the resources which are in the chembacks, you have to consider the type of technology to ensure that you don't have many people getting into the parks. Now, we looked at the other sources of energy for Kenya, that is the levelized cost, as compared to geothermal. We found that geothermal had the lowest cost. Everything was okay with geothermal except that the first delivery. It took long for geothermal projects to be delivered. So we realized that if we address the first delivery, then we will be home and dry. We found that also wind, the corridors where we have the wind, were not available. But the point was this, it was not the availability. Kenya at that time had not done a proper study. We had not put out the wind masts to come up with a wind atlas to accurately determine the wind regime. By the time when we were doing this, that was the scenario. But after more work has been done now, we are finding that the availability is higher than we thought. So one of the things that are critical, before you get to a point where you can start looking for investors, that there must be some minimum data on geothermal, and the data must be very clear and quantified, solar and wind. So you realize that at that time we said availability was low, which turned out not to be the case. Like now, there's a project of 300 megawatts, and it has a potential of more than 1,000 megawatts along that, just for that area alone.
When you mentioned the location and transmission benefit as a positive, but it may not be necessarily near to the house where you're going to supply the electricity. So, because the place is going to be isolated from the distribution area. So in that case, how can we say it's like a positive for location and transmission benefit?
Now, when we say positive, we have a transmission master plan. We have a Kenya transmission master plan, and then we have an East African power pool transmission master plan, the Kenya Transmission Master Plan is aligned to the East African Power Pool Transmission Master Plan. And then the East African region combines the North African Power Pool, the East African Power Pool where Kenya is, and the South African Power Pool. So what happened was this. Initially, there was the Kenya Transmission Master Plan. And so we were looking at that, the zones where you have wind, how far it is from the planned transmission lines. Then later, when it was realized that the potential was very high, now it became evident that if you inject 300 megawatts and more on the system, on a very small system, there is the stability issue. But then at that stage, likely, we had come now to the East African Transmission Master Plan, which now, considering now the large capacity of the base load from hydros, that now the wind coming in was so little that it will not cause instability in the system. Then later, what has happened now, the North African pool has combined with the East African pool and the South African pool, that we are now having an interconnection from Egypt through Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and South Africa. And what has happened under that arrangement, the countries have come together and agreed on the areas of focus, not exclusive, but the areas where they will want to really focus. For example, Egypt is focusing more on solar for the renewables. Ethiopia is focusing on hydro. Kenya is focusing on geothermal. Tanzania and Mozambique are focusing on gas, and South Africa is focusing on solar on solar and wind. So that now the area which has formed what is called a common market is approaching financials with projects as a package, as opposed to each individual project approaching finance. But that now creates a very positive synergy in the sense that Kenya can focus on geothermal, knowing very well as a base load, someone else is doing wind, and someone else is doing solar, so that when we bring them together, then we have a very good energy mix with a lot of input for renewable in the region. Something else which was realized just last year, that all this, the common market is on the same, nearly on the same time zone. Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and South Africa to some extent. And so now what has happened now, they have brought in the West African power pool so that we have different time zones, which will also help in terms of the peak demand, so that it varies with time. But to go back to your question, it is based on the resource, how near it is or how easy it is to connect to an existing master plan. Because if it's not near the existing master plan, then it means there will have to be some changes on the whole. And when it comes to system stability, which has been done by Iberdrola, and with the assistance also Iberdrola and the Finnish company through assistance by the Finnish government, the master plan already shows how the system is going to be expanded. So we find that one is near the system. We find that one is okay, here call, we don't know. Anyway, that is the issue, yeah. So we looked at what point should the investor enter. And this one, we're just looking at the different stages. We have stage 1, which is surface exploration. We have stage 2, which is exploration drilling. We have stage 3, which is appraisal drilling. And we have stage 4, which is a power plant, production drilling, and a power plant. The way geothermal is developed is you do exploration drilling. Either the results can be positive or a negative. If they are negative, there's no further work. Maybe the geothermal potential is too low to warrant further exploration. If it is positive, then you recommend exploration drilling, and then you must secure funds. Maybe here you have spent $3 million US. At stage 2, you are likely to spend close to $30 million US. So you do the drilling. And before you're drilling, you must do an environmental impact assessment, acquire hardware material, under the permits, prepare access underwater, and then you drill the exploration wells. If they are positive, then the area is recommended for further work. So that you will find that you do the first stage, then you stop, you do an evaluation, either go or stop. If go, you have to look for more funding. The problem with geothermal is that when you are at this stage, you don't know whether it will be a go or a no-go. You come to stage 2, you drill the wells. You'll do, again, an evaluation and well testing. And at this stage, stage 2, what you'll get is whether there is a geothermal resource or not. That is what happens at stage 2. Now you find, at this stage, you might find that the resource might be there, but the environmental and social issues are serious. Like in the event where there are certain animals or which are endangered species, or other social issues with the communities, then even if the resource is viable, you might not go. There could be historic sites and things like that. Then you can drill wells. The wells could fail. That is very good because you know there's no resource. And then you might find that the quality, that is the chemistry of the fluids, or the quantity, the amount of steam you're getting from the wells, is insufficient for you to commit a project to commercial development. So you say you are not going ahead. But if you find that the resource is good, then you recommend going ahead with what we call appraisal. Exploration drilling is to confirm that the resource is there. So now you get the funds to do appraisal drilling. The appraisal drilling is now to determine the size of the resource. Here you are just determining whether it is there or not. Here now you are determining how big is the resource. So normally you drill about 6 wells, you do well testing, then you do a feasibility study. This is the most important thing. And once you come up with the technology, then the cost will come in, how much the investor needs to put in. And with those numbers, now you can engage an investor, because the investor will need those numbers if he has to go to seek finance. So you engage the investor, then the power plant design will be met, then there will be a new environmental and social impact assessment, there is permitting, and more important, the power purchase agreement. In the power purchase agreement, you must have the right numbers in terms of cost. These numbers that will go into the PPA in order for you to arrive at the final tariff. And these numbers will come from the feasibility study. And normally, the approach is that the project sponsor, who is GDC or the Kenya government, will do a feasibility study to get their numbers, and the investor will also finance a confirmation feasibility study, which might not be as detailed as this, so that those numbers are going to be used. In the Kenyan case, the environment issues, the permits are done by GDC. But the investor will have to do a PPA with the off-taker. Because the PPA is also required for doing the funding. Now, sometimes projects collapse here because of disagreement on the PPA or the PPA negotiation taking too long. But if this is done successfully, then we go to production drilling and a power plant. In Kenya, the government takes all the responsibility, for example, up to here, up to the feasibility study. And once this document has been done, then the investor comes in. Then from here now, if there is a problem from the feasibility study that is not commercially viable, then you cannot proceed. Or if you are going for large power plants and you think, for example, 50 megawatts is too small, then you might put the project on hold. If everything is okay, then you go to the next one. And at that stage of the PPA negotiation, normally we bring in a transaction advisor for transaction advisory services, and it's the transaction advisor who works between the investor and the off-taker. Then we come now to the power plant and the steam field development, which is normally we do an EPC contract. Then we have production drilling. Then the investors will also bring in a project engineer, but we'll get into that detail later. So that is how the implementation process goes. So the issue is, what is the best point for the entry of the investor? Now, when we look at the challenges we have had in Kenya before, was the issue of financing cap in the next drilling phase. Because nobody wants to come in and finance this point where you can see that the risk is very high at this point, and then the risk goes down as you continue with the development. While the cost is going up with the time. And it is at this point when you do the feasibility study that it determines whether the project is viable or not viable. If you are investing in the geothermal, and then you start from this point, the risk level from this point up to that point is very high. And then the risk from that point is a bit lower, although the cost with time goes up very fast. What we did, we looked at the Kenyan case, where we looked at the well output, because what happens in the PPA model, the well output is important. And what happens is that when you start a project, you'll find that on this side we have the well output, there we have the cost in US dollars. You'll find that the well output goes up as you move to later stages of development, and therefore the cost starts coming down. Now, if an investor invests at this point, then this is the well output that will be assumed, and therefore this is the cost per megawatt that will be assumed in the model. If he comes at this point, then you'll assume that well output in the model and this cost in the model. So you find the cost is going down and the well output is going up. If you take these numbers and you throw it in the model, the tariff model, you'll find that when you start, the tariff is going to be higher, and this is the feed-in tariff in Kenya, which is about 8.9 US cents, and then you find that it crosses this line and it goes even much lower than that. So the question is that where should the investor come in? Now, our objective is to develop a project structure that leads to the best optimized tariff. you don't want a tariff that is too low, but you also don't want a tariff that is too high. This is a study by the World Bank, which says the same thing, that there is an increase in the cost with the time. The recommendation of the World Bank is that you have to, the public has to do the first part using the government, all the way to test drilling, well test and reservoir evaluation, whereby you will have spent a total of about 20-something million US dollars. For the Kenyan case, we are moving up to there, so that we are taking care of the feasibility study, project planning, and we leave the funding now to the investor, and we take care also of the insurance. Now, when you look at, for example, if we start with an RE of 25%, and an investor is entering before you have done the test drilling, and is entering with the commercial debt and the equity from the year one, you find that you will get a tariff of more than 14 US cents per kilowatt hour. And the levelized tariff is higher because the lead time is longer by more than 3 years, and in some cases it goes up to 7 years. Then the rate of return on equity is higher, 25%. That is the type of return on equity that the investors will want, because they are starting on the risk end of the whole development cycle. And he has to spend about 30 million cost of exploration, and that means the tariff is higher. Now, if you take the approach that we have used, is that this earlier part, this is done by the government, and this is through donor funds, climate funds, and others. Then we have which is actually concessional financing. And one of the exciting things is that, for example, the financing we are getting from the African Development Bank is at 0.75% interest, 10 years grace period, and 40 years repayment period. That is very cheap money. And the funds we are getting from government, it is equity. We have also the government. This is the public funds. So we are able to develop the resource up to that point. And then it is at this point where you do a feasibility study and come up with a bankable document, is when now you invite the investor to come in. And we find with that, you can get a tariff between 8 and 11 US cents. But our numbers actually are about 6 US cents. And maybe to preempt what we are going to talk about later, is that we are using 8 to 11 US cents, because when you bring down the numbers to 6 US cents, that can also cause instability in the market, since we are just starting to inject geothermal into it. Now, this is the same figure that we have had, where you can see that we start with exploration, you do appraisal, you do a feasibility study, then a production drilling and the power plant. And the risk level is rising with the time. The investment cost is rising with time. Here, up to the feasibility study, you'll find that the investment cost is very low. So the question is, when should the investor enter? And for our case, we have made it that the investor will enter within that, between the 3rd and the 4th year, whereby the costs are reasonably low and the risks are also reasonably low, for the investor. The costs are low for the sponsor, for us, and the risk is low. And therefore, when you work out the tariffs are going to be reasonably lower. And this shows exactly the same figure in terms of the risk. And up to this point, it is important that the government takes over the investment. And then, because you will be able to get cheaper financing, then at this point, the government can also get some funding through cheaper funds to do some wellhead generation unit, which I'll talk about later. But you can see that the bankability of our project is increasing with time. So the government can be able to recoup some of the money that is being put in investment by doing early stage wellhead generation. Now, our development strategy is to go for 5,000 megawatts.
Yeah, you mentioned the exploration drilling cost $30 million, and I guess the combination of appraisal drilling and production drilling is $150 million?
Yes, now, the exploration drilling cost depends on the size of the project that you are trying to develop. If you are developing a 50 megawatts project, exploration drilling, you drill 3 wells. Production drilling, you drill about 6 wells. Not production, but appraisal drilling, you drill about 6 wells. Now, you realize that before you do the exploration drilling, you have to do the infrastructure. If you are an investor starting from scratch, when you drill the first well, your cost of the project is the cost of the infrastructure plus the cost of the well. When you drill the second well, it is the same. When you drill the third well, so the infrastructure is done once. But then it is also built in the project. If you are doing, and that is how we get the 30 million. The 30 million is the wells, because each well will cost about $5 million US dollars, which is about 15 million US dollars. Then 15 million will be for you putting the water line and also putting the access roads. When you are doing exploration drilling, you will want to do a simple water line because you are not sure the resource is there, and a simple access road. Once the 3 wells are successful, then you will now improve on the roads and you will improve for the water line. But for 50 megawatts, it's about 30 million, 15 million, and 15 million. If you are going for 100 megawatts, then you'll find now the exploration drilling cost, it doesn't change much. You are doing more wells, but it's just about 40 million. Because the initial upfront cost, once you have put the roads, you just need improvement on the roads. The investment will now be just on additional wells, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for a very excellent presentation. 2 related questions.
Yes.
Given the long gestation and life cycle of the geothermals, how do you, number one, maintain a politician's interest? Their interest basically is an election cycle, which is 4 to 5 years at the most. The other is the investor. I mean, again, this is a huge project with a huge lifetime in terms of for starting the project. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I will start with the politicians. There are good politicians, there are bad politicians. So you don't depend on them. That's why the government must have policies. Like in the Kenyan situation, the energy policy is there, first of all, in the Constitution. Then it is there in the Act. Then there are regulations after the Act. So that when you have that within those documents, then you don't care about the politician because he doesn't have to like you, because he has to follow the regulations that are in place. And those are the challenges that we have had in many places, that there are no policies and the regulations within an act of parliament that protects the development of that resource. So that one time you have a politician who is for renewable, things go very well. Then later you have a politician who is not for it. Things go very badly. And that is what we did, was to ensure that it is there in the Constitution, and the people have the right to get energy from the resources that are renewable as a human right, constitutional right. Then you have the Geothermal Act, which is through an act of parliament that protects the policies for the development of geothermal resources under the entity that is responsible for that. Then you have the regulations that also go with it. So once you have that, you have taken care of the politician. Now comes the investor, and that's what we will go in the strategy, that the investor will want the whole transaction document to be structured in a way that regardless of what happens to the country, his investment is safe. Whether there are riots or things like that, he'll want that to be there in the whole setup. Now, that is where the government comes in. That must be provided for in the whole contract. But it can be provided for in the contract and it can be withdrawn. So how can you stop, for example, a leader from removing some of the clauses in the contract and say we are not going to accept that? And that also comes from the policy, from the act, and with the clearly defined roles. And that's what we are going to come in. That what we made sure was that these were in documents, that before an investor comes on board, you give him a document that he can go through and see that his interests are going to be protected. And in the presentation, hopefully that will come out. Yeah. Then in the issue of long period, we are realizing that it is the approach to development that was the cause of the long gestation period. That if things can be done differently, and it is being done now, then the issue of long gestation period can also be addressed.
I have a follow-up. I just was a little bit unclear. I know maybe later you'll be getting into the risk mitigation schemes to deal with this pattern of risk that you just described. Are those risk mitigation schemes to reduce the risk just of the exploration drilling or also of the appraisal drilling?
Yeah, there are risk mitigation schemes for both. And I'll also get into that in the next presentation. One of the schemes is GDC. And I'll get into that. Yeah. As a company, it was formed to take away the risk from the investor. I've mentioned the issue of land issues, community issues, permitting and licensing. That is one. There is the issue of the risk mitigation fund. That is also there. We'll discuss that. And there's the issue of insurance. And then there is another touchy issue of the sovereign guarantee, which we'll also get into that. Yeah. Okay, so what we want to talk about is the development strategy, having considered all the challenges that had been identified, and now having decided on the best entry point. So the next question is, how are we going to move forward in a way that we can be able to get 5,000 megawatts by the year 2030? The leading producer of geothermal in the world now is the United States, at about 2,900 megawatts, followed by the Philippines at 1,935 megawatts, and then Indonesia, about 1,100 megawatts. So when we talk about 5,000 megawatts, it is quite an uphill task. And we had someone from the World Bank who came and told us that he looked at our business plan. He said this one is a pipe dream. But you remember the story I told you about my wife. that I started dreaming from the day I got married. So I've been dreaming, and I know life is easier when you, when you dream. One thing we realized, these are considerations, that there are things to take advantage of, that there is strong interest in a donor supporting green energy right now. This is the best time. There is no other time as good for renewable energy as it is today. And in particular, there is interest in geothermal development in Africa. We realize that we have to take advantage of that. Then we also realized that we needed to diversify financing for the project and optimize complementarity between investors and the donors in order to leverage the existing resources. Diversification of the funding options is very important for renewable. So you have to go out there and see what are the funding options. And the point is that all options are good. It depends on how you have structured your project to see which funding option I will use at which stage of the process. And then what we did was that we are going to take grants for early stages to demonstrate potential, that Kenya as a country is going to demonstrate the potential is there through the use of grants. And what is critical is that you must produce a document that when whoever you are calling the donor, when he comes visiting you, you give him, that shows that you have a clear roadmap of how you are going to develop. You are not going to tell him stories. There has to be a document. And that document has to be seen to be workable. Things like site identification, resource exploration. That means that the exploration drilling, the issue we are talking about, the $30 million US for the upfront risk for the 30 megawatts is going to be done by yourself. Then you are going to do a feasibility study. There was the issue of this guy from the World Bank talking about, he's an economist, that there is no, that what the world economies are going through today, there is no money. But me, what I know from the time I was young is that if I don't have money in my pocket, it means it's in your pocket. Money doesn't increase, doesn't reduce. I don't know what economists talk about. The US now, they are broke because China, they have the money. It's just as simple as that. There is a lot of money around. The only problem is that the people having the money are getting fewer and fewer. That is called a retro. Anyway, so the point is that there is money around. There's a lot of money chasing for very few projects. There are people with money. They want to invest in projects that have a good return on investment. These people, they don't know anything about renewable, but if they find out that that is where they will have a return, they'll get it. And they don't have to be experts in geothermal, in solar, in wind, in biomass. They just have to be convinced that the project is viable. People want to make money. So that was very important. Then one of the biggest challenge. So for us, this is not a problem. The problem is capacity building. You need people to structure those projects. You need people to think. You need to do site identification. You need people to do exploration drilling. Then concessional loans for public investment. Then we realized that the private sector must come in to speed up the process. And then There are companies that are traditional investors in geothermal, companies in New Zealand, Iceland, US, Italy, Japan. We thought that we are going to move away. We are going to encourage everyone who has money and is looking for a return, a good return on investment, to invest in geothermal. So the challenge is that how are we going to get this person to invest money? One thing we found out was that even in a country like Kenya where people are poor, people are willing to put their money together in a sort of a cooperative movement and are only some 2 megawatts of power. So, but also we realize that the risks must be mitigated. So there has to be risk mitigation facilities and some form of insurance instruments for the early stages. If an investor has to come in early where he knows the risks, then one has to mitigate against those risks to have the investor coming in. Then this is the challenge. Then there was the need for sovereign guarantee for the major production and the power plant development stage. And this is now an issue to do with the government. And that's why the question that has been asked is pertinent. You can have a leadership that you can support. You can have a leadership that you can shy away from providing the sovereign guarantees. So what we looked at is that what it means, sovereign guarantees to a government, it means it raises the level of debt because it reflects on the debt of a country. So the challenge is, how can we soften this through this? And that is very important. Now, we developed models from the earlier pictures that you have seen. We had what we call option 1. Option 1 was where GDC, through concessional loans, moves all the way from infrastructure drilling to appraisal drilling. We do a feasibility study, then we do production drilling. Then the investor comes in and we just sell the steam to the investor. What that means is that the steam is a fuel, treated like fuel, and therefore when the investor comes in, he doesn't worry about the availability of the fuel. But that means that this investor, this IPP who is coming in here, must be given a guarantee here by this company, but this is a company which can collapse. This guarantee must be supported by the government. And that becomes a heavy burden on the government. So what the government did was, the government now to go to the World Bank and the African Development Bank for the government now to be given a partial risk guarantee. So there is the guaranteeing here of this person, but this person is being guaranteed by the government, and the government guarantee is backed by the World Bank and the African Development Bank. What happens to that? It is reflected on the government, the exchequer balance sheet, but it is only 25% as opposed to being 100%. So that has an impact in reducing the level of debt of the government as opposed to the government doing a full 100% guarantee. That is the first option. The good thing about this option is that the government takes responsibility for the development of the fuel. Now, under standard practice, one will argue that this will be very expensive, but going forward, I'll be showing you the success of this model. So, there are some fields where we have applied this option 1 model. And I said earlier that the model you are going to apply will depend on the appetite of the investor. For example, at the construction of the power plant stage, or maybe that one will come. Option 2. Option 2, this was the model that we had favored earlier. Because from the comments of the World Bank, we feared that we might not be able to raise the money to move. You realize the other model, we are coming all the way to there. We realized that we might not get down there. So we said GDC will do the infrastructure, exploration drilling, the way to the feasibility study stage. Then we will bring in a contractor. Now, we have a joint development partner. Under a joint development contract, as opposed to SPV. It is an SPV, but we will get into that later. So it is a contractual arrangement whereby the partner brings in 60 to 80%. That is the partner, and the GDC brings in 20 to 40%, depending on the desire of the developer or the partner. You realize GDC has taken care of the upfront risks. At this stage of production drilling, GDC, all the wells that are dry, that they are drilled, they go onto GDC balance sheet. All the wells that are positive, they go on the two companies' balance sheet, shared 50 or 40, 60%. So here we are taking care of the risk, the production drilling risk for the investor by taking to the GDC balance sheet. But now that risk on the GDC balance sheet, we are using a risk mitigation facility by KfW. Also, a risk mitigation facility by the Kenya government and a partial risk guarantee by the African Development Bank. So you'll find that GDC is taking the risk. The reason why we are doing this is that certain risk guarantees cannot be given to a private company. But the GDC, being 100% government, we are able, through the backing of the government, to be given those guarantees. So, two things. The low cost of money that GDC is receiving, like, for example, 0.75%, grace period of 10 years, and a 40 years repayment period, and that the fact that we qualify for guarantees. And then for all other projects in Kenya, what the government did was a deliberate effort to boost geothermal development, that all other projects in Kenya, the government, when the government takes a loan for on lending to companies, the difference between the government gets loans at 1%, they on lend at 7%, the 6% goes to Renewable on all infrastructure projects. And in this case, the focus is on GDC. So because we are getting lower money, lower cost money, we are also getting the mitigation funds. So we take responsibility for all the dry wells drilled there. But there is another point, that while we are doing exploration drilling under the feasibility study, we ourselves, we know that the risk level of getting the dry wells is very low. So while we decide to take over the risk of dry wells, we are not worried because we developed the field from that stage. So we have found that this approach also, the first option, we have companies that are interested in moving forward with us. This option also, we have many companies that are interested in moving forward with us. Then one thing that we do as GDC, that all the environmental issues are handled by GDC. We take it away from the investor so that, like in this first model, the investor is only interested in bringing the power plant and constructing it. So he has a guarantee of steam from the GDC side. he have the guarantee of payment from the off-taker. The GDC side guarantee is supported by the government for provision of steam. The off-taker side is also supported by the government for paying of the for payment of the power. Now, this is a symbol picture of the different models. The option one is this one. GDC develops all the way to the power plant. And then this one is where GDC drills the wells with an IPP at 40%, 60%, and where all the dry wells go on the GDC balance sheet. Then there's another option of GDC to the feasibility study stage, where also some investors are interested in that. Then we have the GDC doing all the way to exploration drilling, and then appraisal, the investor coming in. Then there's another model where the investor comes in all the way.
So the slides you just showed were options?
I've shown this one and this one. I've not shown the rest. But what is happening is that investors who come here, they are the ones asking for 25% return on equity. The investor coming here, this one here, asking for about 18% return on equity. But if GDC was to develop the field all the way, then we are only allowed 15% return on equity. So with this, you realize that the cost, the tariff goes up like this. Now, our approach going forward, we are not in favor of any of this. We are holding an investor conference in April where we have those investors who had already been shortlisted through the expression of interest for a number of these of the fields under these different models, and we will be holding discussions with them to see their preferred model. Three of the fields already they are decided. They are under this model and under this model. The other fields, the other investors who might be interested in these other models, we will want to welcome them, so that we will want each field to be developed under its own model, depending on the appetite of the investor. First, under this model has attracted the highest number of investors. We have and from all types of business. We have data chemicals. They're interested in coming in because the way the model is structured is that you don't have to be an expert in geothermal to invest. We have Mubadala from here. We have Arab contractors who are into making roads. We have Marubeni from Japan, and many other Ibatrola from Spain, and many other companies that are interested. The approach is this, that it is, for example, this IPP, the whole project is structured such that the IPP, he just needs to be an investor. The RFP requires that he has to bring in an engineering firm to do the EPC, to manage the EPC contract, and also to do O&M. So that an investor should only have money. So we are not looking for the standard investors in geothermal. That's why even companies like Mubadala, who have never been involved in geothermal before, they are now interested in investing in geothermal. Companies like Arab contractors, they are also interested in investing in geothermal. Even in the Spanish Ibatrola have never been in geothermal. So essentially, what it means for you to invest in geothermal, you need to have a contract with a geothermal firm as a consultant for you to go through the bidding process. Then, once you construct the plant, then you have an O&M contract with a geothermal company. And we have many oil companies that are also now interested in investing in geothermal. In this case, the partner, the IPP, doesn't have to be a geothermal company. The IPP just have to be a company that have funds to invest. Because since GDC is partnering with the IPP, GDC is a geothermal company. In any case, if GDC makes a mistake and the wells that are drilled are dry, it goes on the GDC balance sheet. And the investment is also guaranteed. Now, this just shows the value chain and the type of monies that take place. Now, this is how the contractual arrangement is structured. So we have GDC here developing the steam field. That is based on the first option. Then there is a steam supply agreement between GDC and whatever the SPV that will be formed by whoever is the investor. Then you will have an EPC contractor who is brought on board by the SPV under an EPC contract. Then there is a power purchase agreement to the off-taker. Now, these under these are backed or guaranteed by the government, and that is critical. In the past, KPLC was forced to put money in an escrow account, a certain amount of money to support this power purchase agreement. Then the SPV can raise funds through equity or through debt financing. This is now the model for the second option. There are also arrangements for the other options, but I'm just focusing on this. That GDC and the IPP will be the steam seller. Then, still, the power purchase agreement is with the off-taker. Then you have the IPP. Through that arrangement, we are able to take care of some of the risks that make the investors fear to invest in geothermal and also in the country. Now, what I want to move to is, even if you have those structures, there are certain things that must be done by the government in order to bring in the investors. And these are the things that, for example, the Kenya government has done. There is the issue of the creation of this company. Then there is the issue of independence. If a company is created, the company has to be independent. Some companies are created by a presidential degree, and the same way they are created, the same way they can go. So it has to have an act of parliament, and it has to be enshrined within that act. So the company has independence from decision-making, and it is under a specific act with its regulations. And the roles are clearly defined, empowered to make decisions. And one of the critical issues, there is the issue of security of tenure, so that the president cannot wake up and say, Simiyu, tomorrow you go home. I'll take him to court, to the Constitutional Court. Then reporting periodically to a parliamentary committee. So there's a parliamentary committee on energy where this company reports to for all the processes. And every time Parliament has to do a report, but the committee takes the report to the Parliament. Then there is a strong financial commitment by the government, like what you have seen. Then the PPP structure is determined and aligned with the sector-wide strategy and the policy. So the structure, within the policy, there has to be PPP policy, which is part of the sector-wide structure. Then this strategy, but the sector-wide strategy is aligned to the East African Power Pool. And like what I said, we have the East African Power Pool, which is aligned for the common market of East African Power Pool. So you have alignment that the geothermal strategy should be aligned to the national strategy, should be aligned to the regional strategy, and should be aligned to the bigger picture, to the bigger strategy for the East African region. And then also, there is within the African Power Pool strategy, where I say that there's the North-South strategy, then there is the East-West strategy, and now they have been put together. So that the geothermal is protected within that sort of arrangement. And we see the strike layer defines the public and private roles. And we are also structured to benefit from the funds and the market size under the single window within the East African Power Pool. What happens is that when you sell a project and you say, this is a Kenyan project, the issue is the market large enough? But if you sell a project and it is also within the regional market, the East African Power Pool, it makes a difference. And when it's in the whole, within the continent, it makes a difference. Now, in Africa, for example, 3 projects have been chosen as the projects that has the potential to have an impact on energy situation in the continent. One is the Inga in the DRC, and the 2 is the geothermal in Kenya. Then the 3rd one is in Senegal, is a gas project. But the point is that the project has to be anchored in the national strategy. We should be anchored in the regional. Then we should be anchored at the continental level. Something else that the government has done, in order to bring efficiency, all this in the 80s used to be under one company. So there was unbundling of the companies, so that generation we have like Kenyan, in transmission we have a company called Ketraco. So that as we plan to expand on the geothermal, the transmission is also planning in tandem, so that everything is done as one. And when we do the project financing for development of a geothermal field, the transmission also has to be in tandem. And because of the interconnectivity between the countries, we are building more capacity in anticipation of the power supply in the connected system. Then we have a regulator who regulates this, the whole electricity sector, who is independent. Then we have an appeals tribunal in the event that there is a disagreement in terms of the tariffs, and you presided over by the regulator. Then you have an appeals tribunal where you can appeal, and all of them have clearly defined roles. Then what the government has done, it has established a national public-private partnership framework and a secretariat. And the good thing is that the secretariat is within the Treasury, but the enactment has gone through the cabinet and the parliament. So it is within it through an act of parliament, not some nice president saying, now you are going to have a secretariat. Essentially, the reason for going through all this is so that when governments change, you don't have certain policies changing. And you realize that this is a process to have all these things done so that the whole policy is protected. Otherwise, if it's just good leaders deciding that we want to go green, then there will be no protection. Now, one of the things that has also been done as a policy, that the contracts, they have to be long-term, at least 25 years. Then the project design is to emphasize financial sustainability instead of low tariff. Because there is a realization that if you emphasize financial sustainability, and once you have a lot of investment coming into the country with many players, the costs will be controlled by the players themselves. And that is critical. Then in the structure of commercial contracts should be predictable. What we have done is that we have developed already contract documents so that anybody who is interested in investing can be given a contract document, and that person can look at the contract and even give his feedback, deciding whether to get involved in it or not. As of now, we already have contract documents for the joint development agreement, contract documents for steel sales agreement, contract documents for power purchase agreement. So you have those contracts in advance. And one of the things that the government wants to do is that they want to see a number of projects that are successfully implemented, because the successfully implemented contracts are an incentive themselves. It is the successful ones that will tell the other investors that if you invest here, you are going to succeed. So we are in a hurry to have a number of projects being implemented successfully. Then the commercial contracts are negotiated as early as possible, but after the feasibility study, because that is a basis for the negotiation. Now, the negotiations are between GDC, who is the sponsor, and the investor on the steam side, and KPLC as the off-taker. And the government is not allowed to interfere in that process. Now, one of the things that we have tried to do is to ensure there is transparency in all contractual arrangements. That means that all documents are available, and what we do, we engage a transaction advisor to preside over those negotiations. Now, some of the tools that the government has come up of reducing the upfront costs, which I've already mentioned, is grants for research, drilling, and demonstration. But we also have some tax incentive that all equipment coming into the country for renewable energy are tax exempt. This increasing financial returns on production tax incentive, this has not been implemented. Reducing cost of licensing, this has been done for reason that most of the licenses have been taken over by now the Geothermal Development Company. So your only license that someone needs is the power generation license. Then there is risk insurance scheme, which the government has worked together with a company from the UK, as that is one of the first schemes for insuring drilling insurance. Although as GDC, we have found it not very good, because for us, we find it very expensive. But as we have gone for the risk mitigation fund, where money is put aside, if you drill a dry well, you get 70% of it. If you drill a successful well, that money is rolled over to the next well. So you make sure you are successful. So you have that risk mitigation fund, which we think this is a better way than drilling risk insurance. We believe, not we, me, I believe that the insurance companies, they are just interested in making making money. But that is my opinion. We have a feed-in tariff for geothermal. We have the guarantees, which I've mentioned. And then we provide data from surface exploration and drilling performed by us up to the time of the feasibility study, including the reports. This one I've mentioned. Then there's the issue, many of the financiers, they also look at political stability. And I put the stars there because that is a monster which we don't know how to control. And that's why I said the only thing we do is we vote. Then there is a Geothermal Advisory Group. What the Ministry of Energy has done is that because they cannot deal with GDC, they have 5 people who are paid for by the World Bank. Under that arrangement, every 4 months, they come and sit and look at how we are doing business. They are non-experts in geothermal technology. And then they write reports on how we are doing, and those reports are now given to the government, so that even when the government is making decisions, they are informed by the experts. We have an expert on exploration. We have an expert on power plant. We have an expert on projects. We have an expert on finance and an expert on geothermal reservoir management. Then the basis is on cost-based pricing. You have your cost, and then you have the return on equity for investors. So in the power purchase agreement negotiation, you negotiate the ROE, then you have that one fixed, then you bring in your cost, and therefore in the model, then you get the tariff. And the important thing is that before you invest, you are given that model to look at before you make that decision to invest, so that if you have any disagreement with the model that is being used, you can also raise an issue. This is the risk management. An investor will want to look at the project sponsor and look at the risks. Capacity building. We have on-the-job focused need-based training. One of the things that we are doing is that we structure all the contracts to have a training component, that every contractor or consultants that we have must have a training component. 1. 2, every equipment we buy, within the cost of the equipment, there is the training component. For example, we have bought about 7 rigs, and we planned in a way that we are having 2 rigs every year. We had the first 2 rigs. We had a few staff who are trained in drilling. And then what we did, we set them out. We did when we were buying the rigs, within the RFP, we included also training. Then it happened that it was won by a Chinese company. So we sent them to China for training. But within the structure is that we have to approve the trainer who is going to train. And he must speak English. Anyway, they went to China, they were trained 1 year in advance, and it turned out that the trainers were French, but which is okay. Then we got the second rig. That's our policy. People must be trained 1 year before the equipment comes, and whoever is the supplier does that. So we have done that, for example, for drilling. The laboratory equipment, we are doing the same. The geophysics field equipment, we are doing the same. And then what we did was that we have an arrangement with some of these, the University of Pisa in Italy for training on volcanology. We have the University of Kyushu in Japan on resource utilization, University of Auckland in geothermal theory. Then we have Duke University, Stanford, Rice University, Berkeley, Reno, Utah, El Paso. And we have been doing this through the support of the African Development Fund, Bank, and the World Bank, and the United Nations University system itself. We have had we bring also trainers to train our people in the field itself, like we are doing with the Petro-Canada, Petro-Skill, and the Weatherford. And through the African Development Bank, we have got things like drilling simulators that are also used for training, not only for Kenya, but people in the region. Then there's a United Nations Geothermal Training Program, which is an all-round course, which is done in Reykjavik, Iceland. And what we have done, in order to train more people, we are now carrying out this training course in Kenya, where the trainers come from Iceland to train Kenyans in geothermal technology on our own equipment and in our own laboratories and in our own power plants. Now, I just want you to see here that in Kenya, we have the highest number of trained under the UNU training in Iceland. We have 72. We are only second to China with 80 experts trained. So with 72 experts, that's quite substantial. But we have others trained in the other institutions. Technology choice. We have made changes on the original design of the program. I will not go there. This is the concept of you have a power plant, you have wells, you collect all the steam, and you take it to the power plant. So you must drill all the wells. If you want 100 megawatts, you must drill all the wells for 100 megawatts. Then you connect the steam and take it to the power plant. So the power plant cannot start operating until you have drilled all the wells. The development we are using is that you drill a well, you generate power, and you have a substation. The substation is expandable. You drill a well, you connect, you drill a well, you connect using underground cables. The cost of a geothermal power plant, 35 to 40% is from the civil works. Now, when you take that model, you don't need the civil works. A drilling rig is about 800 tons. This equipment is about 40 tons. So you can be able to put that equipment on the drill butt after you drill the wells and you start generating power. Now, this is what happens. You can develop power in a modular development of 10 megawatts each, and from the third year you start generating, you start recouping your money, or you can go up to 9 years if you want to do it in one. This will give you early cash flow, and we use diesel on the drilling rigs, so it will offset that. You reduce the development size, and more importantly, you will be assessing the capability of your reservoir while you are producing power. The technology has really changed. That we used to have inlet pressure plants of 600 kilopascals. Now you can go as high as 2,500 kilopascals with more power output. The consumption of steam is was used to be 8 to 10. Now we are getting down to 5. Now, very interesting. In El Salvador, now we are doing geothermal and a solar thermal hybrid, whereby you separate the steam, you generate power direct, and then the hot water, you take it through a steam generator powered by solar. You will create more steam, you flush it, and then you do more generation. For example, the solar PV hybrid also is in Nevada. We have 24 megawatts, which is an addition of 47 megawatts from geothermal. Now, I just want to rush through this. The status, we have applied this principle, and I just want you to know how it is doing. That in Olkaria, our plan was 980 megawatts. So we have Olkaria 1 and 2 have 200 megawatts installed. Olkaria 4 and 5, 280 megawatts. The drilling was by GDC. Already we had financing. The finance already is done, 313 million US dollars. The power plant, 900 million, is already financed by Chaika, AFD, EIB, KFW, and the World Bank. And then there is a project of 560 megawatts for the steam field development. It's already financed by the China Exim, and is going under the PPP, where the IPP will be putting the power plant. The Menengai Phase 1, 400 and 400 megawatts. We have 6 rigs drilling. Our aim was to drill 120 wells, and they invested to finance, construct, and operate the power plant. Still on the Menengai, we have the available resources, and so far we have got 480 engineers on board. This is the financial situation in Menengai. Our plan was for 670 million US dollars, and so far we have raised 848 million US dollars. So the financing has gone ahead of what we had projected. Something else, under the same project, we planned to drill 120 wells, but you see we have materials for 300 wells. So that material will be taken to the other fields. And we plan to move very quickly. We are already putting some 10 units like this, and it is within 3 years. And we have got 300 million US dollars from the US Exim Bank for putting those wellhead units. Another project is called Bogoria Slali. We are going for 3,000 megawatts. That is the potential, and we want to develop it in 3 phases. We have finished the detailed surface exploration. Asia is done. We have to drill 240 wells, and we are starting in the 3rd quarter of 2013. Our project cost is 1.5 billion US dollars, and that is for the steam field development, and the current commitment is 800 million US dollars. The government of Kenya, 400 million. The US Exim, we have the 300 million, and the KfW, 100 million. We have already done expression of interest for 4 power plants of 200 megawatts each, 14 farms shortlisted. This other project is called Suswa, which is actually to the south. And this one, for budget support, Kenya government 200 million, and we already have the India Exim Bank with 200 million US dollars. There are issues of direct use. This is a model from Reykjavik. You get your hot fluids from the ground, you pass them through the houses, and they bring it down. But what I want to show, to bring out, this is what is happening in Kenya. These are products from a greenhouse near Olkaria Geothermal Power Project. And these are the greenhouses, and these are pipes of geothermal hot water that is used for heating the greenhouses. What has happened is that we have a well here. This well is producing steam and water. Then we have a water tank. That water tank has got fresh water, and the water is heated. The fresh water is heated using the steam and the hot water. Then this water is piped through this pipe to the greenhouses. And then there's a vertical column here where they extract carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. Now, they are generating 4 megawatts also from the well. And what they are doing is that they are taking the carbon dioxide in the greenhouses, and the electricity they are generating for increasing the daylight hours to 22 hours. So the CO2 is used for photosynthesis, and the hydrogen sulfide is used for fumigation, so that they are using 0 pesticides. And what they are doing is that the plants are in hydrobots, and then the water is recycled, and the fertilizer is put in the water. So there is a danger of bacterial contamination of these waters. So they are using also the geothermal heat for sterilization. When the flowers leave the greenhouses, they are preserved using reverse refrigeration, using again the geothermal heat. And they were using lake water, but they turned, by changing the acreage, was reduced by 45%. and productivity increased by 40%, and are producing 6 million roses per day. Actually, they are the leading producer of roses. If you just take, and that's why there is the issue of electricity. People don't need electricity, people need energy. And that's something to discuss later. But we looked at the level of employment. There is the issue of direct employment, but just the issue of when you generate 1 megawatt of power, you employ about 1 person. But what is important is that for every megawatt, you generate 1 ton, 8 tons of water per megawatt. In the power generation process, you get steam and water. The water is brine. It is not clean water. It has salts. But the steam, like what I mentioned, when it goes through the turbines, it is condensed, and it's condensed into pure water. So you generate this amount of water. That water, if you do irrigation, the way it's being demonstrated there, then when we generate 5,000 megawatts, this is the amount of people, the number of people that you can employ. The same process which is being used for sterilization of the water can be used for pasteurization of milk. And these are just pipelines of hot water that are used on the farm. Now, this is in Iceland. This one, and those ones, the GDC stuff. And this is a swimming pool in Kenya, which is heated with hot water. Our geothermal. Our scorecard is the finance has been adequate and has been timely. This is the last one. Okay. Yeah, timely. Equipment acquisition has been above expectation. Human capacity, there is a challenge. We are short by 100. We have 480. Infrastructure is behind schedule. And yeah.